So you'll recall that the Dodge Plan is the plan established by Joseph Dodge, the banker from Detroit, who sets in place all of these policies to try and help guide the economy of Japan back towards prosperity, brought in by the occupation by SCAP to do so. And the Dodge line, we talked about more taxes and spending, more subsidies from the government being taken away from manufacturers. We'll get to that again in a second. We talked about less spending in general on things like welfare and education and public works. Talked also about trying to reduce consumption and to increase exports. Talked about the new dollar to yen, fixing it at 360 yen to $1 amount. And we also mentioned this idea of strangulation, which is the idea of trying to reduce the amount of money that's in circulation. They'd actually printed extra money initially in the first couple of years of the occupation. And so this was a way to try and stabilize the supply of currency in Japan. This leads to a very important Japanese recession. So the recession that is supposed to happen with this understandably with this policy here, was quite dramatic. Big industries already sort of struggling with their leaders being sometimes put in prison or being fired because of their role in empire, are going to then have to deal with decreased availability of loans, and loans being called in as well from during the wartime. There are huge layoffs. Toyota laid off 1,000 employees in the course of a few weeks in '48, in late '48. We have lots of bankruptcies happening for businesses as well, so we have even more unemployment. So the first few years of the Dodge Plan were terrible for Japan. But the foundations for a strong capitalist market economy were put in place by this new plan. Those of you who are into finance or economics, this might interest you, but this does allow the possibility for Japan, if it's able to get some influx of business, of investment, to then take off. And this is what happens with the Korean War. The Korean War is what's going to essentially make the Dodge Plan a foundation for growth. It's going to fill in all these possibilities. During the Korean War, which lasts from I'll get to that actually in a second. I'll tell you about the war in a minute, but I want to sort of just focus on the economic impacts of this. During the war, Japan's exports are almost entirely geared towards East Asia, and especially to the efforts of the Korean War. About $2 billion of exports. Korean War, which, as you may or may not know, which I can't for today's time constraints get into great detail about, is a war that lasts for about 3 years, and that during which the United States and the USSR support different competing governments in the Korean Peninsula and the Korean country zone, which are both trying to assert on one side a communist national unification, on the other side a capitalist unification. This is a very terrible war. It has a casualty rate of about 3 million people, including many civilians. It is a war that ends with an armistice, not with an actual end of the war, and the stalemate eventually is resolved by drawing a line on the map at the 38th parallel. But the US and the USSR never actually directly fight. They are only helping Koreans to fight each other. And this terrible theater is what will give Japan the economic growth to jumpstart its economy after the war. Japan's industries, reeling from the management issues and from lack of funds, all of a sudden are being given orders to, or receiving orders to produce vehicles, medicine, electrical goods, food, uniforms, all these things, as well, we can imagine as also munitions for the military armaments. We also see the quick drive to increasingly improve technology that's going to sort of feed back into Japanese industry as well and push innovation. We're also going to see that the U.S. interest in this war, hopefully resulting in a democratic and therefore capitalist foothold on the East Asian part of the Asian continent, will lead them to provide Japanese firms with advanced U.S. technology. This leads to also higher wages for people working in various Japanese companies and overall economic growth. Exports tripled during the course of the war. Production was terrible in the late 40s, but it skyrockets up 70% by the end of this war. So this is one of the key building blocks of Japan's future economic growth. A second pillar of this growth is, or a third pillar I should say, is the so-called San Francisco system. I'm going to pause and just let someone in here. But as you can imagine, the system with this name is based on things happening in the city of San Francisco. Like so much of the post-war Japanese economic growth and stability, this is a very, this sort of system is very much predicated upon U.S. involvement and support. What is happening here? So what is this system? We're talking about a system in which the U.S. and Japan signed the San Francisco Treaty in 1951. That's what's hidden there by the bar. This treaty officially ends the war for Japan. It also sets out the Japanese obligation to pay over $2 billion in reparations to U.S. but mostly non-American entities. And also it's signed by 48 nations. So it's also a way for Japan to close the door, right, on this chapter in their history and turn the page and to move on, hopefully, to another kind of role in the global sort of social and economic and political realms. The signing of this takes place under the foreign minister who will become then afterwards the prime minister, Yoshida Shigeru, who we see here. And I want to continue from there to the other part of this system. And be sure and sign in if you haven't signed in. Thank you. So, sign-in sheet, it's going around here. The other part is the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty. Now, this is not a global, this is a U.S. and Japan treaty, which is going to set forth how they're going to interact for the next decade, and actually more than that. Also referred to as AMPO. Originally, this is a treaty in which the U.S. gives Japan the freedom to pursue its economic development. Since the end of the 40s, right, during the reverse course, the U.S. wants and values Japan as an ally and a bulwark towards capitalism, towards democracy, and against communism. And part of that, it really is about helping Japan to have a strong economy, of which, of course, the U.S. will also benefit as a partner. Japan is going to commit to following the U.S. lead in international relations. So if the U.S. goes towards a certain kind of policy or a certain kind of relationship, Japan will follow suit. Basically, sort of following behind the U.S. in their international relations decisions. The U.S. will maintain bases in Japan. even beyond the end of the occupation, which will end in 52, the U.S. will still have bases in Japan, which will house 100,000 U.S. military still after the occupation is over. So just kind of let that sort of sink in, right? Japan is no longer occupied, but there will still be an important U.S. contingent, military contingent in Japan, who will still be protected from Japanese law by extraterritoriality. So again, right, where this particular element does harken back to a previous inferior status for Japan vis-a-vis the United States and Western countries. And this is actually sort of just to give you a sense of how this will go. Okinawa will actually remain directly occupied by the U.S. military until 72. This seems like a lot of really difficult things for the Japanese to swallow. So why do they accept this? Why are they even willing to sign this? There's pressure, obviously, and there is the reality of defeat, but there also are some benefits. One benefit is that Japan is now going to be able to pursue growth in terms of economic growth without having to pay for any sort of defense spending. Think about before the war and afterwards, there's a huge difference. They can invest directly in things that matter to the economy, things that matter to their growth, things that will make money, that will not necessarily directly cause harm. So we talk about sort of the U.S. nuclear umbrella protecting Japan is part of this as well, right? That the U.S. Will use Japan to fight this war in Korea, but they will also, with all their bases and personnel, defend Japan if anything happens, right? If anyone tries to attack Japan. So really, the U.S. is going to take this role very seriously, and Japan will be able to focus on other things, right, and not on defense. So these are the three sort of pillars that allow Japan to take off in the post-war period. This is a Japanese economic miracle chart, and we can see which one of these is Japan. You can kind of guess, but it's written there for you, but it's this magenta one here that goes up so high in terms of GDP. So when I was younger, we used to talk about this quite often. It was still in the papers in the 80s, right? The continued Japanese economic miracle. It really was pretty miraculous to see, right, looking at it from over here. So between 50 and 73, 10% annual growth. Not just because Japan started out low, because they actually didn't start out very low. Even before the war, Japan was a major global economy, right? And so even when they dipped down during the war, they still are amongst the most industrialized and wealthy countries in the world. So to go from that up so quickly was quite impressive. And in the first 5 years, last to the occupation, the first 3 years of Japanese self-governance, there's a double, every year, the GNP, national product, it doubles as well. And over the course of this 23-year span, from the beginning to the end, we have a 12 times or a dual decoupled multiplication, right? Proliferation of GNP. So just a lot of growth. That's the bottom line here. Making it the third largest economy in the world. Today, China and Japan kind of sometimes vie for this position, but it still is one of the top 3 economies in the world based upon this growth, this early growth and afterwards. So what is happening that makes this happen? Like, what does the inside of this miracle look like? It's not really an accident. It's pretty visible. We can see how this happened. One of the key elements is MITI, which is the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, which actually is a carryover of a pre-war institution, or several actually. The Ministry of Munitions was in the 40s, before the wartime. This was the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. So we actually have some of the same bureaucrats, right, who are now older, but who are still around, who have this knowledge of how to work with big companies, right, and to sort of put the ship, all the pieces of the ship together to make Japan sail towards one direction. And they initiate what we talk about in Japanese as the industrial policy, which is a policy in which there are a couple different pieces. One piece is that the government is going to control which companies get licenses to produce any given product. If the government believes, if MITI, this ministry, believes that the most important thing right now for Japan, given its comparative advantage, to focus its energy on is cars, they will use their money to encourage and to purchase American licenses, often bought for cheap because of their bilateral agreements, and to emphasize that direction. And they won't buy licenses for things that are not as potentially profitable for the Japanese market, and so they use this ability to buy and approve licenses to direct the ship, right, towards what's profitable. They also do the same with foreign exchange, looking at what is, in terms of what Japan can export to their benefit, and using that as well to decide what to emphasize. They also are going to give tax breaks, really low interest loans, and to also impose sometimes tariffs on competing or other countries' goods that might come in and be imports that will compete with Japanese goods. So they use these things to essentially decide what industries are the most important industries in Japan, and make sure that Japan meets the demands and benefits from these industries. They also practice administrative guidance, which is so this is the industry as a whole, and this is how the companies are going to function. They also are actually very active in that as well. They are going to force collaboration and the sharing of technology between companies. So let's say a big company like Mitsubishi has managed to get the money together to buy a really important patent for, I don't know, like a microprocessor. No, that's not happening yet. A transistor, let's say. Then the MITI, seeing that this is an area where Japan has the potential to gain, to have a part of the global market, then would then force or strongly encourage Mitsubishi to share that technology with the other major companies that produce transistors, right? So this is a way to make sure that Japan, the companies in Japan work together in the same direction to achieve the maximum profit and output for these kinds of, for what seems to be the Japan's top priorities in any given sector. They're also going to encourage production cuts or increases that help the industry as a whole. So they want to maintain demand. And if the demand happens to be decreasing, then the MITI will step in and they will actually force companies to produce less to maintain that demand. If companies are competing to try and produce the same thing but a bit better, a bit more quickly, they will sort of try and harness that and also rein them in and encourage them to work together to maintain this growth, to maintain the demand that can be met by just enough supply, but not too much supply. And for me, this really seems it kind of makes this MITI sort of acts like a national zaibatsu, right? A national company clique where the main centerpiece of the main holding company of the various zaibatsu companies that make a one zaibatsu is going to dictate to the shipping or the mining or the coal or the chemical or whatever different small companies are, what to do and what not to do, so the whole zaibatsu can function and make a profit. So this is their role that they occupy, and this is a big part of how they're able to successfully point Japan's ship towards growth. SCAP was also very much a helpful factor in this before the end of the occupation. One important element of this was that they, in the in the 45 to 48 period, purged a lot of the big and sort of middle upper management because of their roles in empire. So this left space for people who are sort of in the middle or even lower middle part of management in these major companies to step up and to have experience but not have had those roles before, to then lead the companies to profitability and to growth after the war is over. SCAP does not necessarily agree with every MITI initiative, but when they see one that seems to be in line with their own goals for Japan's capitalism and Japan's growth or democracy, they do get behind that. I'm going to talk about a few figures who I think whose stories help us to illustrate how this worked. And I'll talk first of all about Toyoda Kiichiro and then about Honda Soshiro. So this is Toyoda Kiichiro, who is the founder of today's Toyota. He had a company that made automatic looms before World War II, before even the beginning of the long Pacific War. So what that means is that he had factories that made large industrial, complicated mechanical looms. And they were exporting mostly cotton, other goods as well, they were exporting their looms for making cotton to other parts of the world, but on a sort of a medium level, sort of medium scale, right, to the US and Europe. In the 30s, actually in the early 30s, they began to get contracts from the US, from the Japanese military for both equipment, which they were able to produce, repurposing their machines to build other kinds of machines, but also the Japanese military then invests as well in ways that they can use their industrial know-how to build other kinds of machines for the military. They used this investment to develop their first passenger cars in '34. So things are going well for Toyota. But then if we fast forward a bit, as you can imagine, this is the first Toyota passenger car. I guess pretty nice. But the war was very difficult for Toyota, and then after the war, especially thinking about the Dodge plan, it almost bankrupted this company, and they were unable to succeed in that context. They laid off 1,000 people in '49, and even more. If we look at from 45 to 50, we're talking about thousands of employees who were laid off at this relatively, again, medium-sized company. But the Korean War then breaks out, and then the U.S. military contracts with Toyota to produce 5,000 plus vehicles, and suddenly this company that was on the verge of bankruptcy has the opportunity to make, to fill orders and to make a profit. And has also these ties now with the United States, right, and their markets, which they will use to great advantage. So the 60s is a story of Toyota being able to expand sales throughout Asia, but also into North America, and doing so with great success. Let's talk about Honda. Honda Soichiro, who we see here, another interesting story. He had a very small plant as well. He made pistons for Toyota in the late 30s. Piston rings, right? Not even the whole, just a part of the piston, right? To go into vehicles of various sizes for Toyota. The plant was bombed in '44, and when this happened, then we were left with a need to start over. And so he has the idea of asking MITI, the Ministry of International Trade and Commerce, for the right to produce pistons. They say no, not useful. Then he starts on his own without the support of the government, the Honda Technical Research Institute in '46. Basically, it's like its garage, right? He just gives it a nice name. And he's working on a way to create a motorized bicycle, which he achieves for the first time in late 48, which then will become the first motorcycle of Honda in '49, which then, as you may or may not know, will sort of be the foundation for the creation of Honda Motorsports, and they're going to be already outselling Harley, which is the U.S. Major manufacturer of motorcycles, and Triumph in the UK by the mid '50s. So this is how that story gets sort of started, and as you can imagine, the story will continue as we go forward in time, as they begin also to build cars. The last story I'll talk about is that of Sony. Where does Sony come from? Some of the same kinds of elements to this story, it's worth thinking about them. On the left is Ibuka Masaru, and on the right is Morita Akio, who are the founders of Sony. They are interested in small electronics, and they apply and get the approval from MITI, from the Ministry of Industry and Industry, for the right to purchase a license for a transistor in '53. And using that, they create a tape recorder, but it is large and it's not very convenient. But they keep working at it and using this. So then they're able in '79 to create the. Can you see what that is? It's kind of supposed to be up here, but can you see what that is? Just like there's some headphones. It's a Walkman, yeah. So the Walkman in '79 is what is the fruit of their long efforts to use this MITI-approved access to U.S. technology to their advantage. So those are just 3 stories to give you a sense of how this works, how the government decides what isn't important, and then they support industries that seem to have the right idea, and oftentimes to great success, like these 3. Let's talk about education, another important part of this process. Along with the many reforms of the occupation authorities is that of education. And in '46, Japan has a 9-year compulsory education system, which means that you have to go to school from kindergarten up through the end of middle school. And that primary school will be classified as lasting for 6 years. And that lower and upper secondary school will also be 3 years. So it really mirrors the 12-year education of an American school in that sense, or many other Western schooling systems as well. The big change, though, is that now education is coeducational. All the way through, you're allowed to go to school if you would like to go to school, and there's no more only girls, only boys schools, unless the school has that in their charter, which is allowed. And so what we see is in the '60s, all these schools, like University of Tokyo, are going to all of a sudden become coeducational, and it's going to really rock their world. And that there are some interesting articles about that. At the beginning, it's quite complicated. They aren't really sure how to do this, and they're using textbooks from during the war, from the wartime, because it's what they could afford, it's what was available. And a lot of the people who are working in education are the same teachers who were there during the wartime. And one of the things I think is interesting to look at is what it looks like to have a textbook from the war that has been revised, right? And this is an example of one of these Suminori textbooks, where you can see that the bad, ideologically not allowed material is just blocked out, and the rest of the textbook is the same. So these are the foundations on which the education is originally built in post-war Japan. A big part of this also has to do with where you go after middle school and after high school. The high school system is successful and that most people in Japan will, by and large, finish high school and almost all will go to high school by 1980. The culture of elite universities that we discussed, some of these schools like Waseda and Keio before, as well as the Imperial University in Tokyo, were around before, but now they're going to be part of a system that is going to be a national system of top or elite universities, both private and public, and this will sort of make them even more powerful in many ways. To get into these schools, you need to take exams. Before, there were lots of ways to get into schools, but the exam becomes standardized as the way to get into schools in the late 70s. This means you have to you go and you sit for the exam to enter into the school of your choice. If you apply and you take the exam and you don't make it, then you have to wait until the following year. It kind of sucks, right? So you have it's in your interest to either apply to a school that is a little bit below your level, or to work really hard to get into the school you want to go to before you actually take the test. So we also see the creation of what are called cram schools or juku in the 70s to begin to help students to prepare to be able to go to the schools that they are aspiring to. And these elite universities, Osaka University, Kyoto University, Kyushu University, Hokkaido University, all these schools, as well as schools like Keio and Waseda, they are your ticket to a good career or a job in the government. So parents are pushing children to really do well and to take these. This is Yotsuya, Yoyogi Seminar, which is a very famous juku in Tokyo still today. Those who don't pass that year become ronin, so they're just sort of waiting until they apply the next year, hopefully to get into their school. And that is part of, again, the high level of education in Japan, as well as the impressive amount of competition for access to good education and then to job afterwards, is part of what makes this country at this point in time so prosperous and so successful. So I wanted to include that as well. This slide is labeled a bigger and more connected post-war Japan. Japan in the wartime period has a small population dip because of atrocities like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but also because of starvation and because of the war fighting fatalities as well. But between 45 and 55, the population of Japan increases by 18.6 million. So to give you a sense, like Japan, I know there were about 40 million in 1905 and about 55 million or so, right, in the late 30s. So that's quite a big jump, right, in this time period, especially in Japan's major urban areas. Before this even begins, the government is going to begin trying to think of ways to handle what they foresee as a population boom. One of the big shifts is in paved roads. Not a big idea, right? But what happens is during the post-war period until 1980, the number of roads that are actually paved, right, with concrete, tar, some form of hard surface, and that's maintained, right, is going to go up by 45%. This is important because if you're going to go anywhere, right, if you're going to try and connect this country, being able to drive from Tokyo to Yokohama or from Tokyo to Tokyo's outskirts and its suburbs, having paved roads is essential. And before it wasn't as important. But the biggest transportation revolution in Japan is the development of the Shinkansen. You heard of this before, Shinkansen, a little bit? Yeah. High-speed train, right? High-speed train, the bullet train. This is one of Japan's major innovations that the world has taken note of. In '64, the Shinkansen is unveiled after over a decade of experiments and investment from the Ministry of International Trade and Industry. Collaboration with French and American and British scholars of physics and I don't know, all these, they all worked together on this, but Japan was the one who got there first. And they're able to reduce the time it takes to get on the normal, because Japan already had trains, right? They were already using trains a lot, part of why they didn't have good roads, right? But this is going to reduce the time it takes to get from Tokyo to Osaka, the two largest cities in Japan, from 8 to 3 hours. So it's a major change. And today it's even less than that. So you can do it in about 2 hours. These train systems, as well as the local train systems that are also very important in Japan, are also going to allow, and also the paved roads, for the cities of Japan to have, increasingly to have suburbs, where you can go and live and you can commute to work. This is, again, a major change for how people's lives are going to work in Japan. I also mentioned this is part of the rise of danchi, which are apartment buildings that are in these neighborhoods as well, that I will show you some of those in a second. So this is the Shinkansen. This is the Nozomi, the one that goes along the East Japan route from Tokyo to Osaka, and then it keeps going. And this is a suburb called Hikarigaoka, and it's in Nerima, which is a suburb of Tokyo. When I was much younger, I taught English illegally in Japan. I would go here to the station, and I liked how when you left the station, you were in kind of like a little village, right? There was hairdressers and like KFC and like Dunkin' Donuts. So there was just all the different things you could need. You can go shopping. There also was like a YMCA kind of thing where you could do sports, all built around the station. And that was a long time ago, but this is still how Japan, in many ways, functions today. And it's all, again, tied to these various systems of trains. So if you work in Tokyo, you take a 40-minute ride and you come to this place, you're at home, this is where you could live. This is a danchi, or this is the kind of buildings that oftentimes companies would actually purchase land outside of major cities and build these eyesores that are very efficient and convenient, and they would give their employees cheap or relatively cheap housing to encourage them to go ahead and have a family life and to live that life, but to still work in the city. This kind of situation, though, as you can imagine, also does lead to a certain separation between family life, usually for the men, right? Actually, always for the man, and life at work. One of the elements that we see a lot, even still today, but a bit less, was the change in the culture of the saraiman. We discussed this figure a few classes ago, right? The person, the Japanese businessman wearing his business attire, going to work. After work, the saraiman would often go out with coworkers in sort of a social ritual, right? And they would consume a lot of alcohol, and they would go home late. It's like 9 or 10 p.m. And they would go home late, and they would oftentimes be quite inebriated, and so they would end up oftentimes passed out or drunk. So if you go to Japan, Tokyo, or mostly Tokyo, you'll probably see this kind of thing happen from time to time as men go home and then don't wake up to get off at their stop. So this is a pretty common sight that speaks to the importance of this culture, right? Drinking after work, but also what it looks like when he arrives at home at some point, this person. What I want to talk about last, before I finish today's class, is the place of women in all of this. So the post-war miracle, I'll mention more on this next class, really is predicated upon the willingness of a home unit in which the wife stays home and takes care of the education and other activities of the child. more on that next class, but what I want to talk about today is the fact that this relationship also was encouraged by the state in interesting ways. One of the ways is that of savings campaigns. In the post-war period, the government really was promoting savings as a way to save Japan. Even before the occupation was over, before there was any success from the Dodge Plan, they were pushing this narrative. Bank of Japan and the finance ministry worked together to promote this campaign, and there were actually 9 of them altogether in the late 40s. And the occupation authorities and Dodge thought this is a good idea. Let's promote savings. Japan today is a country that has saved very well, right? And it's and if you go to Japan, you can go to the postal savings bank, which is just the post office has bank accounts where you can save money. So the U.S. is a country that spends all the time, right? And Japan is a country that has saved, and part of that culture comes back to these kinds of campaigns, which actually are built on. I'll get to that, where they come from in a minute, but they are built on the government efforts to promote this kind of savings. The government, the Minister of Finance in '47, on a video address, he told everyone on the radio that you have to reduce your living standards. You have to economize and you have to save your ultimate money. He told everybody to use less tissues on this broadcast, and he's talking to housewives because they're the ones who actually control the money in most of these families. Along the same lines, the government also will be a co-initiator along with Japanese companies of the so-called New Life movement, also again aimed at housewives. From the point of view of companies, this was a way to try and align companies' needs of employees who are at work on time, who are awake, and who do their job efficiently with the overall desire to have family life sort of function well, how those things will sort of support the country and its growth. And it actually builds on pre-war campaigns by the government. There were several frugality and savings campaigns back in the 10s and 20s and 30s, and then there also was a day life improvement campaign back as well in the 30s that also is sort of a precursor for these campaigns that happened in the post-war period. The Prime Minister, Katayama Tetsu, was into this idea of having this new life movement function, and he actually launched a campaign to build a new Japan, and part of it was that he was going to support groups of youth or women to organize locally for public life renovation. So what that means is the government is really trying to encourage people to, at this point in time, to save their money and to also focus on important priorities for, mostly for the home. Women are interested in this. They read magazines. They find this really actually to be a bit empowering because they're able to think about things like how to organize things, how to structure their kitchens, make life more efficient, but also things that matter to them, like how to save money better, but also things like how to acquire and make more available birth control. Kind of under the radar there, right, among other priorities. And what we see is this movement actually was one of the things that allowed women to take parts in associations and promote things like the right to divorce, things that were already on paper, right? The right to abortions, the right to have birth control and use birth control, these kinds of things, and they would actually sometimes even become activists later on. We'll see figures in our latter part of our class that actually came through these small urban and rural groups to then become local and national leaders.